Good evening, everyone. Just giving it a minute there for people to enter. Welcome back to the Canadian Concussion Center's webinar series. This is actually our last session of 2023, believe it or not. If you haven't been here before, my name is Leslie Rattan, and I'm really pleased to be moderating our series, which is sponsored by LIUNA, the Labor's International Union of North America. And the series, again, if you don't know, was originally developed for individuals that have suffered concussion, that have ongoing symptoms, but also helpful for family, friends, caregivers, and healthcare providers as well. Just so that you know, we will be resuming in January. The schedule is just being finalized now, so keep your eyes open. That'll be on the website. And before I go any further, I'm just going to ask Josh to pull up our poll that we always run just to get a sense of who is in the audience. This helps with our planning. So if you can just click on whichever one applies. Great, thank you. And just for this evening as well, things are a little bit different tonight. As you probably know, we don't have a single presenter as we usually do, but I'm really pleased to announce we've got 5 guests that are joining us that have all sustained concussions and are here to talk about their experiences. And that we'll be doing that for approximately half of the session, and then we will open it up for questions as we always do. So in order to ask your question, if you look to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. So please click on there and enter any questions that you may have there. If you're having any technical difficulties, please enter those into the chat and Josh can give you a hand. Just so that you know as well, all of our webinar sessions are videotaped and archived and are on the Canadian Concussion Center's website. Thanks, Josh. So Josh has actually just put the link into the chat, so you can cut and paste it from there. And also just so that you know, the presentations from all of our speakers are also posted, so you're actually able to see the PowerPoint presentations, which are on the website. So I think I've gotten through everything. So what I'm going to start with is I'm actually going to move on to have each of our guests introduce themselves and just give us a little bit of background in terms of your concussion or concussions and course and what's happened and sort of bringing us up to date in about 2 to 3 minutes. So I am just going to maybe call out names according to how I am seeing you on the screen. So Kath, I have you to the left, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I guess 2017, around this time of year, actually December, I was in a car accident, got rear-ended by a very large CAA truck carrying another car. And after that, my head just became a magnet. It was really weird. I had 3 subsequent concussions. The last one on a beach in Costa Rica, walking along, hitting the head by a basketball. I can laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny at the time. So yeah, I've had about 4 different head hits, I call them. And I'm not sure how much I want to go into all the treatment. I guess I'll wait for your subsequent question about that, Leslie, but that's my
Sure.
That's my history, and I'd say that that was over a period of 4 years.
Great. Thanks so much, Kath. Next, I have Karen.
Hey, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I suffered the concussion from which I am recovering now in April of this year. I have one prior, a very mild concussion in 2016, Neither involved a good story. One was randomly hitting my head coming out of a taxi with a big legal bag. I'm a lawyer by profession, and the other was just a weird sort of slip or a fall rather at a friend's house on something called a yoga wheel, which you may not know what that is, but it's not even that big of a thing. And I didn't even hit my head. I hit the back of my ribs, but my head whiplashed. And as a result of the nature of that injury, I actually didn't know I was concussed for a few days, which was, I think one of the unfortunate things that may have delayed my recovery a little bit. But yeah, I'm happy to, go into more detail as we get questions. I will say that this week was my first week back at work. And I really was sort of being cautious because I'm a lawyer and all my work is really on screens. And yeah, so part-time and then building up from there. And so far, so good. So yeah.
That's great to hear. Thanks so much, Karen. Rob, I have you up next.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Leslie. Hello, everyone. My name's Rob. So my latest head hit, or when I was diagnosed with a concussion, was 12 months ago. I was mountain biking down a ski hill, and I came off with my helmet on, and I got a big whack on the head. I was unconscious for 3 or 4 minutes. Prior to that, I'd been knocked out as a rugby player, but in my youth, so I had about 30 years without a severe bang on my head. But this last one appears to be the tipping point. And I didn't experience what I thought were the typical concussion symptoms, where there was difficulty looking at a screen, bright lights. So when I got my hit 12 months ago, I just carried on with work. But shortly thereafter, I started feeling very fatigued, issues with cognitive function and memory, and surprisingly, anxiety. So I'm 12 months in now. I feel there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but that's a little bit of a snapshot of where I'm at.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. Next, I have Laura.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura. I was doored in June of 2021. So dooring, that's just a colloquial way of saying that I was biking in the bike lane on Bloor. Folks know if anyone's in the Toronto area, Bloor Street West. And there's a part near Christie Pits where you have the bike lane, then you have cars right that park to the left of the bike lane. So a passenger was actually a car that was illegally parked. It wasn't parked in the designated parking because there's actually barricades in the designated parking between the parking spots and the bike lane, but it was parked outside of that, and the passenger opened up their door into the bike lane. And so I went straight into the passenger door and then over, and I was wearing a helmet, but my head hit the sidewalk, and then other parts of my body did as well. And it's been over 2 years now, and I still sort of deal with concussion symptoms in my day-to-day life, and it's just something I have learned to live with. Previous to the accident, like to my accident, I didn't have headaches. I had like no previous concussion or head hit, so it has been like a fairly substantial change for me since the accident in terms of managing headaches and concussion syndromes or symptoms. I'll pause with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And finally, Mateo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mateo. My last concussion was August last year, so almost about a year and a half. Prior to that, I've had 4 other concussions. I got my concussion while playing hockey. I was a goalie and took a slap shot off the head. Still deal with some symptoms, some headaches, some memory issues, and it's definitely been a big change in my life, and learning to adapt to this has been a bit of a challenge for sure.
Great. Thanks so much. I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. I mean, there's often some overlap, but as Rob was saying, people can also experience very different symptoms and different courses. So the next question that I wanted to pose was, in terms of any factors that you think that may have interfered with or that are, continuing to interfere or slow your recovery. Was there anything that you were aware of? And we don't have to go in any order, but does anyone have any comment on things that may have sort of hindered your recovery? Kath?
I think I'd like to talk about access to help, because I feel that for me, it was 4 years really of repeated head hits before I actually got the help that made a difference. And so that first concussion, 2017-18, I went off and did all kinds of things. I went to London. I was on the subway in London. I was, hauling heavy things, canoeing. And all that time, I knew I wasn't right. I had dizziness, vertigo. I won't go through all the symptoms, but the usual nausea. The absolute worst thing, and I'll say this just because maybe someone else has experienced it. I've been writing a novel, and so I couldn't write anymore on screen, and it was very painful for me. I tried writing in other ways, but it was difficult. And one night I decided, just like, screw it, I'm gonna stay and write, and I stayed up. And that night I woke up and I was blind in my left eye. Now, it only lasted for about 2 minutes, but I remember thinking, oh, well, I can still see out of my right eye. So what happened during that time was my GP at that time really was not familiar with concussions, and he sent me to a neurologist who was basically admitted that he didn't know much about concussion. It wasn't his specialty. And so at that point, I was crying all the time. And my sister Barb works at Sunnybrook, and she put me in touch with the Sunnybrook Concussion Clinic. And for the first time, I spoke on the phone to someone who understood what I was going through. And then she said, we can't accept you into our program because you're too old. And so it's like, okay. But what she did do was gave me a link to an incredibly useful set of questions and suggestions for managing concussion symptoms. So that was the first really wonderful thing that happened. And then I'm going to say I began to see some professionals via going through the Emerge, because I just couldn't get to anybody who seemed to be able to deal specifically with what I was going through. And so my partner and I decided that we would go through Emerge. And when we did, that allowed us to be referred to Toronto Western. And there I met 3 doctors. And I guess this is the point of this. I got completely contradictory information. One of them said, go for it, go out, do stuff. The other one said, you're healing, take it easy, slow down. And so I was quite confused. And then, miracle of miracles, I finally got an appointment with Dr. Tartaglia. And up to that point, the most recent thing I'd been engaged in, which when I think about it now, it just makes me shake my head. I had been involved in a concussion program where I had to, and forgive me if this is something that really works for other people, because maybe it really does work. I was itemizing and assigning a number of points to every activity in my day, adding up all the points, and trying to maintain a total of 30 to 40. And every day I would go over that number. And then I would think, okay, I'm doing too much. But it was like this hours I would spend every day just counting up the number of points. The first thing Dr. Tartaglia said to me was, why are you changing your life like this? And that's when I knew that I was going to be meeting someone who could really help me. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Kath. Really, really great to hear. Mateo.
Just to kind of relate to Kath's point, prior to my most recent concussion, I had another major concussion about 4 or 5 months prior. Went through a whole recovery process that was kind of mismanaged, and I was given the same way very different information from what I was told when I started seeing Dr. Tartaglia. Just much more extreme versions of what she had told me to do in my recovery process. And when I was recovering from that concussion, although I was still dealing with symptoms, I was told I was cleared to go back to playing hockey. And I was still dealing with headaches and some memory issues and a lot of issues at this point still, but I was told I was cleared, so I went back to playing. And when I got my most recent concussion, I had found out that I wasn't really technically fully recovered from my previous one yet, so they kind of compounded and stacked on top of each other.
Wow, I'm really sorry to hear that, Mateo. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Go on, Karen.
Rob and Karen. Rob, go ahead. I think
No,
I saw
Karen, you
your
had
hand
your hand up
first.
first.
Rob wants me to go first.
Okay, Karen, you go.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I think getting the right care is very important. And I also had the experience of inconsistent information depending on who you were getting your advice from. In terms of initially, I think the factor that might have set me back is what I mentioned is similar to somebody else who spoke. I was working at my computer screen for 2 or 3 days. Not, and my main symptoms have been sort of head pressure and nausea. And then it got to the point where I couldn't focus, and I realized that something was wrong. And I think so. Then getting into the right care, I think even it's not just medical doctors. Like I think there's only so much time that a specialist medical doctor, I like Dr. Tatter, who I had, or the other doctor who you guys had, can spend with you. Kind of going through things at a micro level. And I think there's such a big learning curve in the beginning to learn how to manage your activity and your overall energy output. And you need somebody like I had, and we'll go into this in the last question, but a physiotherapist and also an osteopath, and people who would really get into the detail about your day to day and help you with this sort of 2-point rule. For example, you're told that cardiovascular exercise is very important for growth factors for concussion recovery. Which is, they were speaking my language. I like to do that anyways, but I was sort of blowing through my threshold every time and really kind of exacerbating my feeling of being unwell until I learned how to start out slowly and go from your threshold, just kind of knocking on the door of your symptoms and pulling back. And I found with all of the activities, you sort of don't know you've overdone it until it's too late. It really creeps up on you. And so you really need to have that training to learn. And so my biggest challenges were computer screen intolerance and, the kind of overexertion were things that would trigger my symptoms. So for me, it was so far, I'm not 100% out of the woods. I'm still at, half-time work for now. But the progress was not and still is not linear. It goes and it's kind of getting used to that. And it was sort of slow and steady wins the race. And I will say one other thing, that the need to stay positive, and that people can tell you a lot of horror stories, and people say really and things that you're not sure why they're telling you these things, because I think one of the things I learned about was seeing some of the other experts was about the anxiety negative feedback loop. So that, you know, when you get anxiety, that in and of itself can exacerbate your symptoms, and then you get the symptoms, and then that creates more anxiety, and it can take you in a bad direction. So I could go on and on, but I don't want to monopolize. So I'll turn it over to you, Rob.
Thanks so much, Karen. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
You asked what didn't go well or what hasn't gone well. I think I'm the worst person in my recovery. I got in the way of it. There was an innate stubbornness to just keep going and not really accept that I had any sort of injury. So, and that led into all sorts of different issues in terms of just pushing every day towards the end of the week. So my recovery during the week, I'd rest at the weekends, and then I'd feel recharged Monday, and then by Friday I was just exhausted. And I knew it was happening, but I suppose it's just the work world too, didn't have the luxury to take time off, but there was this stubbornnness just to keep going. But what I think has helped is an acceptance of just accepting that, you know, I've got a brain injury, and just to take a step back, have a little bit more patience with myself, and keep telling my family, please have patience with me, and it takes a little bit of the pressure off during the day. So it's really accepting that it is a process that's working through. There might not be an end, but it's really just taking every day as it comes.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. Laura.
Yes, and I'm happy to wrap up for this round of the questions. So I think in terms of key barriers to recovery, for me, like it was in part, I suppose, riffing off of Rob, it was like not wanting to accept there was actually a problem and wanting to just keep steamrolling ahead, particularly with work and with screen. So I really quite in competitive industry, and like I wanted to get back to work, and I wanted to find ways to accommodate and to modify, like, which I did, but I arguably went back way too soon, like even with all those accommodations and modifications. And so, you know, I think, and I remember people saying, like, you really need to take the time at the beginning. Like if you rush back to work too soon at the beginning, like that can really be a barrier. And even though people were telling me that, like I didn't listen. And I now wonder, like so many months, like 2 years out, like would my life be different, right, if I really had taken that time at the beginning? And I mean, you can if forever, so it's not a helpful thing, but I do occasionally think about that. So, and work, it also in many cases equates with screen time, right? So by going back to work, you're invariably putting yourself in front of a screen. So that's a key part of that, right? That screen time is not helpful. I mean, it wasn't helpful for me. It was really triggering. Same with Zoom calls. And then I think another thing too is, like, the world doesn't operate like a concussed person does. So, like, you know, my sleep was not necessarily regular, and I like wasn't good about always going to bed at 10. And so like that in itself was a form of barrier, because as soon as I like started to accommodate or like making lifestyle changes, like really go to bed by 10, you know, and like sleep a certain set number of hours, like that in itself was even like a slight modification that would help. I'd be less likely to wake up with a headache in the morning if I actually like maintain those regular sleep times. Another barrier, again, and these are just like lifestyle changes, is like drinking less. I wasn't a particularly big drinker to begin with, but like, you know, I stopped having a glass of wine, and like I would feel better the next day. Like there were some things, particularly at the beginning, like they just felt so strongly correlated. Like certain things, if I did it one night, my headaches were so much worse the next day, right? And you start to kind of figure out what those things are that will make your headaches like more exacerbated or less so. And like, you know, having a glass of, even like one glass of wine, you wouldn't think it's so terrible, but it's like even that you can feel it depending on the nature of your headache and how your body is. And so sleep and, you know, having a drink, also things like, you know, concerts, games, like being out in crowds, like restaurant, bars, like all of those things, you know, especially for me, like I couldn't really walk or ambulate very well at the beginning. And then when I could, it was like, it was sort of enticing. The idea, it was the summer, like, oh, it'd be great to go out to a restaurant or a bar. And like, you know, that was not helpful, right? Like the noise, the commotion, like that in itself was just way too much, and like way too much stimulation. So I think those things of just like being really gentle with yourself at the beginning, and even on and off, right, over time, depending on, you know, how you are, how your head is in any given day. And again, as Rob said, right, for folks around you, just be patient with you. Like, you might not be able to go to a restaurant or go to a bar, and that's okay. Or you might have to be that person, which I never was before, of like, oh, can I move? Like, this table's too loud, right? Depending on where you're situated in a restaurant, like, it might just be too loud, and you know, you could maybe be moved outside or to a quieter place, or if not, you might actually have to leave. And like, it was really hard for me to speak up like that and self-advocate at the beginning, and now I've gotten kind of used to it. I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm that person. Like, the music needs to be turned down, or I need to move, or I'm gonna have to leave because I actually can't be in this environment. Like, I will have a headache within an hour. And I just know myself now and how my head responds. So I think those things, right? It's a lot of it's environmental, you know, and figuring out what triggers you, and then just trying to reduce those triggers.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. That was, yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard lots of this before, and I know also that frustration with getting different advice, I think is hard. And, you know, hopefully it's going to improve as we, you know, as the education continues to, you know, get out there to, you know, physicians and other healthcare professionals. But the, you know, the recommendations too have been changing over the years. So, but of course, as someone with concussion, I can totally understand the frustration when you're, you know, you're told one thing and then you move on to your next person and are told something completely different. So thank you for sharing all that. I've heard some of the next question was, and totally fine that we sort of mix this up a little bit, but in terms of other factors that you actually felt were helpful, that have facilitated your recovery. I know we've heard, like Laura was just making that really great point about environmental stimulation, and I think yes, the brain is just extra sensitive to a lot of things, not just noise and light, but alcohol and things like that. Whereas before, yes, one glass of wine may have had a certain effect, and post-concussion, it has a much, much greater effect. So yeah, so does anyone want to comment on what, yes, Kath, go ahead.
I think one of the things that I look back on now and think was so helpful to me was talking to other people who had had concussion. It felt very lonely, and it felt, you know, that so people would say things like, oh, you know, I've hit my head so many times and I've never ever had any problems, like, you know, implication, what's wrong with you kind of thing. But talking to other people, I was part of a group briefly called BIST. Some of you might be familiar with that, the Brain Injury Society of Toronto. There I met other people who'd had various sorts of brain injuries, and initially that was a really good thing for me. The other things that I would touch on are things that Laura said, and that is having the courage to self-advocate when the environment doesn't always make it easy. And for me, it was also being able to say, you know, I come from a very social family, and so just saying, no, I can't do this, was not an easy thing to do. And it wasn't always accepted without question. Driving, being in a car was very difficult for me. And so taking trips, just even an hour long, became impossible. So one of the things I did discover that was quite useful was wearing headphones, good, really good sound reducing headphones, because sensitivity to sound was a main thing. But it wasn't just about the sound. It seemed to be about the motion that was the motion of a car that was connected to the sound in some way. And so the noise canceling headphones somehow, in combination with really good Polaroid glasses, allowed me to be in a car and to travel some distance without getting a really bad headache, for example. As Laura mentioned, I'm sorry, Laura, sleep had been from the get-go. I first hit my head in December 2017, January of 2018, I stopped sleeping. And so 2023, I still have not achieved a really good sleep routine. So I envy people who've managed to do that. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Kath.
Yeah.
Rob? Yeah,
For
go ahead.
me, one of the two major issues for me was lack of sleep. Because when I hit my head, I also ended up with tinnitus, that ringing in your ears. So that was a vicious cycle. The doctor was saying you need rest, but I couldn't rest because I was awake with a tinnitus. So I went down a medication route for that temporarily, just so I could get some sleep. And the other thing I mentioned at the beginning of mine was the anxiety. I've not been an anxious person before and had a severe anxiety attack a month after, and I still do have some anxiety. So working on that side of the recovery has been really helpful for me because nobody likes being anxious, and it's not a nice place to be, but having the tools and understanding how those can help you with your recovery certainly has benefited me. Yeah, so that's that.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. Karen?
Yeah, for the sleep and anxiety, I don't know if the doctors recommended amitriptyline to anybody here. That was a medication that was offered to me, and I didn't go on it per se. It's like an antidepressant, but you could also use it just like intermittently. So if you've had a few bad nights, because I also found it was important, like not getting a proper night's sleep, like alcohol would impact me so much more the next day than before I suffered the concussion. So, and just sort of the knowledge of having this medication that was safe according to the doctor to use as needed took away like the anxiety around sleep as well, because you felt like, okay, if it's a bad couple of days, you can kind of use that to get back on track. I also find staying hydrated with a lot of water to be very helpful. Getting back to the anxiety management in general, like all the things that you should probably be doing in life in general, like journaling and meditation, I found even more important in the context of the concussion. And journaling in particular, like I would journal like specifically with respect to the concussion, how I was feeling, how I would feel after certain triggering activities, so that when I went to an appointment, I would be able to go through my journal and have a summary wrap up that I would prepare in advance to be able to go through. And I feel like providing them with that information was really helpful for them helping me in noticing things to tweak to the care. Even just for example, I don't know if anybody here was using the F.Lux program on the computer for computer screen intolerant. And in speaking, when I was getting ready to go, or even before, a few months before getting ready to go back to work, I met with an occupational therapist, and she noticed, like, so she suggested, I think you're better, like, try it without the F.Lux. That might be easier. And I took it off and it was way better. But, so like things, it's all so idiosyncratic. And that's one of the really hard things, is that you really have to things don't work the same for the same people. It's okay for me to say specific healthcare professionals, there's a physiotherapist and an osteopath that I found specifically very helpful. Is that okay?
Yeah, we don't normally recommend specific individuals.
Okay,
But
well, I don't have to then. I don't have to. But I will say, well, can I mention the two clinics?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's the Cornerstone Physiotherapy Clinic is where I had my physiotherapy person who really kind of helped sort of on a first on a weekly basis, and then after to, you know, curate a plan with me that was, you know, helped me very much on the road to recovery. We did try vestibular and therapy, you know, with the, and I will say that didn't help me all that much. I tried it. I found it a little bit triggering, and I ended up backing off it. And the osteopath, which I had never known what osteopathy was before, that really was a turning point for me, in terms of my wellness. That was the Roncesvalles Osteopathy Clinic. And they put me on supplements as well. And I had been on some, but magnesium glycinate was incredibly, I found incredibly helpful, and that was together with vitamin D3 and K2. This is obviously all subject to everyone's own consultation with their own providers and doctors. But the other two were vitamin C and omega-3. But I found whatever it was, that combination, and seeing the osteopath, I really felt like things started to really pick up steam in terms of my recovery after that visit. And I can't necessarily say exactly why, but you know, little manipulations and things that she would do, and she would say, you might feel this way after, you might feel that way after, and it was like she was like a soothsayer. Like everything she said, I would feel, I did feel. And you know, it sort of built on itself in terms of my you know, positive mental outlook as well. So yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. Go ahead, Matteo.
Yeah, I'd say I had a very similar experience to Rob. You know, for me, I was never an anxious person, never had any mental health issues, and it was definitely a big change for me. And the biggest part of helping that with me was just being able to talk about it to the, you know, people that are close around me, whether it's my parents, my brother, whatever it may be, and seeking help from a professional, talking to a therapist. You know, I've never been one to talk about, you know, pent up stuff, but to me, I found it really helped me, and it helped kind of get rid of that anxiety and helped to deal with that anxiety, which I found helped deal with a lot of my headaches and helped to just kind of eliminate some of my symptoms without having that added stress to my schedule.
Yeah, I think two things I would mention that helped. I feel like a lot of good strategies have already been discussed. So I think two new ones I would mention is, you know, I think certain physical activities like you just might not be able to do anymore. Like for example, I still really can't cycle. I have a lot of trunk stuff with it. But even running, like I was training for a triathlon actually before I got hit. So I was in like supremo shape, and then I like could barely even walk. And I still can't run the way I used to without triggering headaches, but I can walk. Like I've been able to, you know, I can walk back, and I'm a fast walker, so I'm able to now walk at the speed I used to walk. And like I know that I have that in my back pocket, and I feel good walking. Like walking does not trigger my headaches, and I can really trust that. Like I haven't had any scenario, and I'm also relatively close to High Park, so you know, in the woods there, it's like, you know, usually there's not a lot going on. So if I'm just like having an off day or what have you, or I can feel a headache coming, like I'll go for a walk, and like I can trust that in a way that, you know, I can't trust other things necessarily to not trigger a headache. So I would encourage folks, if they can, to like try and find that thing you kind of have in your back pocket. If it's like a nap, or if it's like turning on your favorite podcast, just something that'll like bring the stress down, any anxiety down, and that you kind of feel safe within. You like, you know, it's unlikely to trigger a headache when like so much potentially could trigger a headache. So I found that like really helpful. And then the other thing that I found helpful, and this definitely changes with time, because now, you know, I can do more things than I did at the beginning. But towards the beginning, like, I mean, I really, you know, wasn't doing much at all. But then I would max out at like one activity a day, for example, like, or on the weekends. And I would just like, nope, like I've already committed to my one activity. I'm not committing to anything else, as opposed to overcommitting and then getting a headache, and then like being really upset because now you're dealing with a headache and you have to figure out like, hopefully it'll go away, maybe it won't, maybe it'll be a bad one, etc. So like I think just better to like know what that is and stick to it. Because alternatively it's like you get a headache, then you have to cancel, then people are upset with, they're not upset, but like you might be feeling like you're letting folks down. And I similarly have a social family, and so with my sisters in particular, like we can rack up a lot of activities on a Saturday or a Sunday, and I just got really good at being like, no, like one thing. So I would, you know, it could be two or three things depending on where you are in your recovery, but if that's helpful, like if you're someone that is hesitant to say no, just set that limit before you've committed to anything. And then as soon as you have your one thing, then it's really easy to say no, I can't actually. You can even say I'm busy, right? Like you can create that little white lie if you need it and make yourself feel that bit of better. But like, that's taking care of yourself ultimately, right? And working within your limits. So I think those were two strategies that helped.
Oh, those were all really, really great. Thank you so much. I'm just aware of the time. I think I'm going to sort of combine our last two questions. And this is, do you have any suggestions, recommendations that you would give to, I guess, number one, to family members, friends, caregivers, in the event that we have those people out there, or to healthcare providers, just based on your experiences?
How
Rob?
can we go here? I think for me, advice is just try and get them educated as quick as you can, and use them as a support system if you can. A busy household with family of 3 kids and a wife, and there's a lot going on, but very quickly when they understand where I'm at, where the dad is at, it's not been having the ability to process everything at once around the dinner table, multitasking and the communication. But they see that back in the day, they would see that I'd get incredibly frustrated and it was upsetting to everybody. But educating them on the why and the new me, so to speak, is I'd get to that really quickly, because then they can support you in ways that they know will help as you go forward. So it's a matter of education and maybe inviting them on sessions like this, your people in your family or people that are close to you, to help educate them might help. But that's me.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Anyone else? Matteo?
Yeah, I would say just, suggestions to family members and people around you is just to be patient. For me especially, it was a big change in my life. I was really slowed down, and people want you to kind of get back to doing normal things, and it's having them understanding too that you can't necessarily do the things you used to be able to do. It might take you a little bit longer to do some things, and it's just being patient with what you're able to do, and not trying to push them to do more than they're capable of. That's going to set them back, and it's going to bring up some headaches, some symptoms, and it's going to harm them, really.
Great. Good advice. Thanks, Matteo. Kath?
Yeah, I was going to add, just in terms of good things, I have a very good therapist, and seeing someone who's a psychologist or someone who is familiar with concussions or head injuries and the mood swings and anxiety, and and has suggestions for coping with those. I think, to go along with what Rob said, for me, the really big thing is education. And I would say your webinar series is probably one of the best education tools that I've ever seen. So I would highly recommend that. I don't know what training family physicians get, but that family physicians see this webinar series. And number two, that you find a way for this webinar series to get into the hands of every gym and health teacher in high school. I think that, through the TDSB, for example, that would be not too difficult a thing to do, but to have kids in high school see some of these sessions, to learn what concussion is and how to recognize some of the symptoms and the treatments, that's just gold. And then the last thing I would say is family. I was so fortunate. I have a partner who, I couldn't bear the sound of a knife and fork, and he just covered all the stuff in the kitchen with like a dampening cloth, but since my last concussion, I've been able to be a support to other people. That, all of a sudden in the last year, it just seemed that I knew a lot of people who'd had concussions. And what I discovered in that process was that they often had family members who, as Matteo said, were sort of poking them, like, why is it taking you so long? And so if there's a way, if you do have concussion, if you, in your treatments or if in your consultations with your healthcare provider, take a family member along with you. And again, if there's a way of incorporating families into the webinars, bring somebody along who bribe them if you have to, just it's so important for families to be part of this.
Thanks so much for those suggestions and recommendations, Kath. That's great. Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I think briefly for family that may be on the line, like, just because a family member may not be talking about their concussion symptoms, like, doesn't mean that they're still not experiencing them. Like, I know for me, like, it can be upsetting to talk about it, and like I tend to not talk about it unless I'm asked. I mean, like, with my partner, I will talk about it more openly with him, but otherwise, like, I don't raise it as sort of like, oh, want to hear something fun today? Like, I had a really bad headache this morning. I think that's just not going to happen. And so, like, there's certain folks or like certain family members, if I do happen to raise it, they're like, oh, really? Like, that still affects you? And like, kind of this surprise thing. And I suppose, like, just don't be surprised if a family member who was concussed, 6 months, 7 months down the line kind of offhandedly mentions it, because it could just be that they've been dealing with it all along and they just weren't talking about it because it's actually really hard to talk about it. And hopefully they do have the health professionals they talk about it with, and those are the folks they tend to talk about it with. And otherwise, they're just trying to do their best to get through the day, right? So I would say that the number of times I've had like friends or family kind of be surprised, or like, that's been hard, because then I almost feel like I have to defend the fact, like, oh yeah, no, like, I am still living with this. Hopefully it'll go away, but like, not yet. Like, it's just not a fun conversation to have. I think the other thing for those that might be newly concussed, like, or like family members to those, like, navigating the system can be really, really hard. Like, remember when I left the ER, there was like a number for the concussion clinic. Like, I was supposedly supposed to follow up, and like, I like half-heartedly tried to make a call and never got through. And my sister ultimately took over like that advocacy on my behalf right after the accident. But it ended up being that the ER doc, the clinic they connected or like referred me to, they didn't accept me for a criteria because I was in a motor vehicle accident, and so I didn't fit into their eligibility criteria. And so, like, it took a while for me to get connected. Like, there's no way I would have been able to do that on my own. Like, my sister really was the one who set all that up for me. So also just recognize, and I'm sure you would as family, like, that the person who's been affected might need some help, right? And might need more than just, bringing over a quiche. They might actually need you to like take the reins and figure out how to get the medical care they need. So those would be my thoughts.
Those are great, great suggestions. Thanks, Laura. Karen, did you want to add anything? No? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We've got a few minutes left. We do have some questions. Let me just scroll up here. The first one, Kath, is actually for you. What is the link that Sunnybrook gave you? And they're wondering just about how Dr. Tartaglia was helpful. Oh, you're muted, Kath.
The Sunnybrook link, I can't give you, but I could probably send it to Leslie, or you can just find it by Googling actually Sunnybrook Concussion Center. And what it is a booklet of several pages that, because I wasn't reading on screen, I could print out and read that way. Dr. Tartaglia sort of changed the whole paradigm of concussion for me, because she said the C word, and the C word was cure. And I was, what? You can cure this? And I was so shocked, because it had been over 4 years. And by the way, my family physician had made the referral, but it took, I'm going to guess, 2 to 3 years to see her. So what she did was, so she first sort of just changed the paradigm for me of, this is something that, yes, you can get over, because it had been going on for a long time. And certain symptoms would get better, and then others would not, like the sleep. So I went on a drug, gabapentin. I'm on the lowest dose now, and that helped with all kinds of things. It helped with anxiety. It helped with sleep for a time. And it just made such a huge difference. She also gave me a written prescription for 30 minutes of heart-raising exercise a day. And I'm not always really good at that. I had been taking dance classes my whole life, and every form of dance I did was percussive, was like banging my feet on the floor, tap and flamenco. And so the first time I tried going to a tap class was a total disaster, could not. With the gabapentin and with headphones on, I went back to classes, and actually COVID really helped me because I could do those online. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic here, but so I would say thinking differently about concussion is what she helped me to do, and the gabapentin was actually very helpful in my case.
Great. Thank you so much, Kath. We've got a question, and probably a number of you can comment on this. Is there any way to minimize symptoms during screen time? So modifications to the screen or software to make reading easier. Does anybody want to comment? I know probably all of you are on screens a lot. Yeah, Mateo.
I found the biggest thing for me, and most devices will have it, is you can turn off the blue light on them, or just getting blue light glasses, combination of both. I found blue light in general was the worst thing for me with screens. So whether that turn it off through my device or wear my glasses for it, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I
Great.
would totally ditto that. I'd purchased blue light glasses like a couple years ago, like well before the accident, and just sort of discarded them. Like I found I didn't use them at all. And then when my OT kind of mentioned it, I was like, sure, I'll try it. And it like was such a like it made such a difference. Like it was such a noticeable impact. So I'd say the blue light glasses are turning blue light. And then I also use the F.dot Lux as well. So both of those together I found really help with screen.
Great, thank you. The next question is asking about what was most helpful. We've got screen time again, but with headaches. Does anyone have anything to add about headache and what helped with it? Karen, yeah.
For me, there was a big correlation between anxiety and headaches and sort of tension in and around the neck and, lower part of the head. So, massage, certain kinds of stretches, like when you pull down, things that would just sort of relieve the feeling of tension. Speaking of family members, if you have somebody at home that you can recruit for a head massage. I also do a little wellness routine in the morning with a gua sha. Do you guys know what a gua sha is? It's like that. You see them in the yoga stores and stuff. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's like a they have rolly ones, and it's sort of to give yourself a self massage tool. And I it's very good, and I use it on my neck and kind of on my face, and you can just look it up on YouTube or whatever about how to do it, and I do it on my head as well, and it's kind of a nice calm way to start the day, and it also does, I feel like, set me up a little bit for success. So I do stretches around that. I actually also have a peanut roller. You guys know what that is? They're like the orange balls or whatever. So I guess if you go to a physiotherapist or something, they can give you these tips about how to relieve tension. up in the neck and the head. So I don't know if that's, you know, implicated for everybody, but for sure that, you know, release from anxiety for me, or tension, I guess, is really kind of helps, and especially even preventative ways.
Great. Thanks, Karen.
Meditation has been a big one for me as well. I used to do a little bit before, but I do it daily now, headache or not. I find it really helps just to take your mind and thoughts away from the whatever it is that's causing the ache or pain. For me, it's the tinnitus. When I meditate, I can meditate through that and get to sleep. So if you're not practicing it, I highly recommend it. There's multiple different books out there, or audio books or music that can help you with those aches and pains.
That's great. Thanks so much, Rob. Our next one, they're just saying they're finding the session really helpful. I recently had surgery and my concussion headaches came back, hopefully temporarily. And they're just wondering, I'm not sure if any of you has had surgery, but they're wondering if anyone else has had a similar experience. Rob? Oh, no. Okay. No. Okay, so we'll have to skip that one. Kath, a specific question, and again, we're not endorsing here, but in terms of the noise canceling headphones that you found that worked for you. Oh, you're muted.
They're Sony brand headphone, big gigantic ones.
Those big ones. Okay.
Yeah. I can go get them and show them to you if you want, but yeah, I think if you
Sony noise canceling.
Sony noise canceling, yeah.
Okay.
I would just also quickly mention, like, I have earplugs in my bag, like, at all times. Like, that's also just a strategy we haven't talked about. For those that do have noise sensitivity, I'm one of those people that I can be okay sometimes with light, but noise like can really get me. I always have earplugs, and I think just knowing that you have them and you can put them on if you need is can, like, in itself reduces some anxiety or stress, as opposed to like finding yourself something in a really loud environment and having a moment of like, oh my goodness, how do I get out of here, and potentially not being able to quickly. So
Great. Thanks so much, Laura. I'm aware of the time, but I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more. Sandy is saying she's 6 years post-concussion, and she's wondering if anyone here uses walking poles when walking outside the home environment for stability to protect against unexpected outside movement. No? Okay.
no, but I mean, I do hike with walking poles, and
With poles, yeah.
I encourage. I mean, I think it's a good idea to do, and I suppose just briefly on that point, like, because you really, like, ideally will not get another concussion with it, like at least a year. Like, you really want to be like extra head sensitive as much as you possibly can. Like, if something like walking poles will make you feel more secure on your feet, like, by all means use walking poles. Or if another modification makes you feel safer, I feel like whatever works for folks, because I know I was like quite stressed about not getting hit in the head again those first many months. So, but
yeah.
I use them in winter for ice and snow. And I also wear crampons.
Great idea. Yeah.
In the winter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any ideas for therapy to help with cognitive issues? So did anyone work with any therapists or anything specifically if you were having cognitive issues after your concussion?
Yeah, I definitely did a good amount of that. And I feel like there's a lot of strategies, two of which have stayed with me, but I was not a fan of either, but maybe some of you will. One was, and the idea behind this is that you can incorporate them quite easily into your life. So for those that watch sitcoms, like, so watch your, a 20-minute episode, a half-hour episode, and then immediately after, write down as many details as you can remember from the sitcom. And then the next day, without cheating, write down again how many details you remember of the sitcom, and then compare. And at the beginning, it's like, you're not going to be great. It's totally fine. But But the idea is like you do this like as a practice, like at least once a week, if not twice or three times a week, even every day for those folks who might watch some television every day. And you should notice an improvement, right? So that's one. Another is song, right? So if you listen to music, for example, that's your preference. Try to write down as many lyrics as you can remember from a song, and then the next day try to write again, and then again you'll start to notice improvement. So those were two. In addition to, there's lots of books like brain puzzles and teasers and all those things, but those were two that my OT recommended because you can more easily incorporate them into your life for someone that listens to music or watches TV.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. We had someone ask if anyone has tried musician earplugs, just back to the sound sensitivity.
Yeah, I did, and they didn't work as well. I just ended up using my Apple noise plugs. They seem to be better than any musician.
Okay.
For some reason, I don't know. They didn't really do it for me.
Yeah.
Going back to other earplugs.
Okay. And Rob, someone was asking about they're asking, have you been able to resolve previous concussions with the help of your most recent concussion? So I'm not sure whether you're able to comment on that.
So this is the first diagnosed concussion I've had. I've knocked out and had some knocks many years ago. Maybe my family members might say I've always been like this. So maybe I'm resolving some things that it's been like cognitive function, lack of memory, and just generally irritable. But yeah, this is the first one I've had. I've known, so I can't really comment on previous.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. Okay, and just I'm going to do one more. Someone wondering if anyone went to the States, to the US for treatment. Concussion clinic. I don't think so. No. Okay. Perfect. I think that's, yeah. And I think Laura, thanks. I think you answered one of the questions in the chat. Well, thank you so much. I've kept you a few minutes over time. I just want to thank all of you. I think this was fantastic to hear your stories, your perspectives, and you had a lot of really amazing recommendations for all of us. So thank you again for taking the time to be with us. And thank you to those of you that signed on tonight. Hope everyone has a great holiday. Before I forget, there will be a survey that comes out. So as always, if you've got a minute or two, please complete that. If you have any suggestions for us moving forward, any feedback, we always welcome that. And keep an eye out as well for the new schedule, and we'll be back in January. So thanks again, and have a good rest of the year. Take care.